Hello, folks. I'm just waiting to see if anybody else shows up today. The goal here today is we're going to talk about relationships and the effect that relationships have on your life. Uh, anyway, we will wait a few minutes and see if we get anybody coming, and we will then go from there. So, I am sorry I'm a little few minutes late. I'm still trying to figure all this out. And there is a lot of information that I'd like to share with you as well. And this is, like I said, very new to me as well. So, anyway, I hope to see some people on here and we will go from there. So, anyway, as we begin this, what I want to do is talking about relationships. And when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about, and how I would set this up is how things work out with people or how people do things. And sometimes we get into relationships that are not very healthy for ourselves. And as a psychologist, what I'd like to say is that we find a relationship that may not be, I don't know what the word is, but it may not be the most healthy situation for us. So, with that said, what I would like to do over a few things, and we'll see if anybody else shows up today. But the goal here is to learn a little bit more about ourselves. And when I say this, I always say when we're in a relationship, whether that be a working relationship, a friend relationship, or even in a relationship that is with our significant other, I always call it the ABCs of life. And that is being an active listener, being in present, and in C, the goal here is always to be conscientious or being contative, and contative means aware of other people that are in our relationships. And by contative is that you're aware of their feelings, their emotions. Some people will use the word empathy, and that we have peace centered. And a lot of people will get in a relationship that is not necessarily the case. And what I mean by that is that the growth can occur in the relationship, and that so the goal so in a relationship, I call it, you got to have ABCs of relationship. And if you don't feel that that is occurring in that relationship, it's time to assess that relationship and ask yourself, is this a healthy relationship? The goal here, folks, is to always be present in what you want to do in life. So I always say the first thing when we're talking about this is to always be, like I said, have that active listening skills. In other words, what you try to do with a person, if you feel that the relationship is not going anywhere and they're not repeating, you need to sit down with that person and say, where are we going with this? Listening. So the goal here, folks, is to be active. In other words, a good thing for this would be to say, affirm, and that's part of the A's as well, what the person is saying to you. In other words, you either nod your head or you look at them and you say to them, oh, this was working or that is not working. And then what you do then is when you're affirming that information. So in other words, when I'm saying, and it sounds very somewhat confusing, what we say is, say somebody says, oh, I'm going to the store. Well, then, and instead of saying, which is really not a good affirmative. You look at a person and say, "Oh, so you are going to the store," and then that way they know that you're listening. Or, for instance, someone says, um, for instance, "I am going out." Excuse me. And when they say they're going out, they say "Oh, I'm going out to do yard work." Then you reaffirm by, "Oh, so you want to go outside and do some yard work." So what you're doing is then affirming that situation. The goal here is to always affirm or acknowledge that other person. I think what happens with people, especially in abusive relationships, is we get in tuned to the possibility that things are not always going the way we have planned. So when that occurs, there's always this animosity or this it's not what I wouldn't say a hatred, but a miscommunication about this. And this will lead to the issue of, if you're active with that person, then the issue becomes, "Oh, this person is very active," and then we go from there. So what we do by that is, for instance, say you are in a toxic relationship and that person is not affirming you, then what you need to do is sit down with that individual. And I know that's very difficult. And it's easier for me to talk about this stuff than to actually the situation for the to occur. So my suggestion is always tell people that if it's something that you feel that you need to be away of, take a couple of days off. Like, for instance, one time I felt that the relationship that I was in, for instance, that I was dating, I didn't feel comfortable in that relationship. So I had family in a different city. I went out and said, "Oh, I'm going to take a couple of days off and go over and see family and friends." So that way it distance you from that relationship. And sometimes, and I tell people this because it's part of your personality, is if you start being more active listening, your emphasis or your dating pool will increase. The problem we have is people are habit forming. In other words, they get into habits, and those habits are not what are most conducive. And then when we're in that situation, we it becomes an unknown. So we want to escape or get out of that situation. So the best solution I tell people about it is take that break away from somebody and then evaluate where you're at in that situation. I had a person last week call me up and said, I'm dating somebody, but they're heavy drinkers." And then the best thing I said, "Well, have you talked to the individual about it?" And they said, "No, not really." And I said, "Well, this situation here is that you need to sit down, and you can't go to a bar, or you can't go to another place like a restaurant. Either go somewhere where it's quiet, if you do decide to go out, and have a discussion about it and say, because this is part of active listening and active involvement with the person, because you're creating this active relationship, is sit down and say, 'I really don't like you drinking heavy.'" But part of that is we get so emotionally attached with somebody that as I've said before, that it's a comfort zone for us, and we're willing to sacrifice, even though it's part of our criterion, or is what I call uh, the list of things that you're not willing to accept, but we accept it in hoping that that person changes. And the issue that I always say, if the person doesn't change after you start dating them, the likelihood of them changing is very slim. So the second thing when we talk about this is being present. And that's the B part of it. And being present in a relationship is how a relationship can grow. And what I mean by being present is you look at the individual and say, "Oh, let's be present in this relationship." In other words, what we're saying is you don't look at the past and you don't look at the future, but you look at the present situation as it is. And sometimes when we look at a situation as it is, that is the most important thing to do, is take, assess, and value that situation as it is, and then move forward from that situation. So in other words, You can't look at somebody and you're frustrated with them and say, well, you did this in the past or doing this. What you try to do is just be present with them and just say, oh, do this and do that, and then go from there. That's a situation that is very vital in a relationship. So that's key. And I do that myself, is that I'm being present with a lot of people currently. In other words, when I talk about being present, I say be present with them. So when you're being present, you're not looking at, say, for instance, you could be outside and you're taking a walk and talking about this stuff. And you could say, oh, it's a nice day. Oh, look at the sky. Oh, look at that bird up there. So what you're doing is you're being present with them and acknowledging uh, things that are going on. Or they could say something to you like, oh, look at that bird up there. And then you look up and say, oh, yeah, look at that bird. But that goes back to point number one, which is being active with an individual. The second thing that I think is that I said is important is being present. And when you're being present with an individual, you're being present as well with them. Now, finally, the thing is what I call confirming the situation. Now, when you're confirming the situation, you're rephrasing, or you're looking at the person eye to eye. And this is part of what I call even part of the active listening skills with an individual. So what you're really doing is you're being active with that individual. So the goal always here is to be active and to move things forward in a positive way. So what I'm saying here is I like things being active in a relationship. In other words, when I say active, is like even in a working relationship, what I try to do is I look people in the eye and say, how was your day? How was your weekend? And then I start a conversation with this. Because a lot of times people will not look at a person in the eye, and that doesn't give a good, genuine contact with that person. So the goal here is always to be in a active listening skill. So anyway, so these are some food for thoughts about things about what I call the ABCs of a relationship. Because we always talk about things, and as a psychologist, we talk about things as being, what are the crucial things in a relationship. Finally, what I want to talk about is when we're in this toxic relationship, and I've just said this a few minutes ago, is I think if you feel like you're in a toxic relationship, this is something that you can either talk to a professional about, talk to your best friend, etc. But I think part of the issue is if you feel like this relationship is not working, is you separate yourself from that relationship for a couple of days. Sometimes it may even take more than a couple of days. It may take 3 to 5 days, and say, listen, I need to get away and figure out what's going on with this. And it's happened on both ends as well, that you feel like the relationship is stagnated. And the point I always say, and I've told this, I had a person last week that talked to me about this. We're always willing to hop in bed with somebody once we have this, what I call this honeymoon phase with somebody. And when this honeymoon phase is over, and that's usually lasts anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes it lasts, for the most part, sometimes can last up to 2-3 months as well. Once that phase is over, you start hanging out with that individual. You realize, is this the person that are really, significant in my life? And the thing I always tell people, and I was talking to somebody again about this last night, our personality, and this is me as a psychologist, our personality is always what I call is the summation or the average of the 5 people closest to you. For instance, those 5 people that are most closest to you, your personality is going to be the sum of those people that are around you. So if you hang out with people that are heavy drinkers, heavy smokers, etc., then that is how your personality is going to be. So in other words, I talked to an individual last week and I said to them, they said, well, I don't like the dating pool that I'm in. So the goal here for me, as I told them, was that you needed to get out of that pool and assess where you are in your life. And in other words, if you feel like the person that things you're not attracting the right people, then you have to assess where I am in my life. So, in other words, we attract what we give out. Now, there's always that laws of attraction, but that's the same thing too. So, if we're very negative, and I have a topic on this as well. It's called "What's in Your Backpack." Doing this in a presentation in a couple of weeks out west. So, in essence, what we are is the summation of the five closest people. But you can change that by the fact that, and I'm not including family members with that as well. I'm talking about the five closest people. And people will say, well, I'm close to my daughters or I'm close to my mom and my brothers or something like that. That excluded, I mean, that's part of it, but I consider like family as one. And if you have children, I consider that two. So in essence, then you've got to come up with three other people like that, because really, in essence, you don't really, as I told somebody 2 weeks ago, you really don't choose your family and you really don't choose your children. They're just part of what I consider part of the backpack. So in essence, those are what you have, and it's what you make of those situations too. So when we see this summation of these five people, then what we're dealing with is how we want to change that. So in other words, if we're in an abusive relationship, that we're finding ourselves to be a very needy person. So, and if we are a needy person, then what you do is you want to change your neediness out of that. Then you have to reflect on yourself. It's not necessarily that the person that you're dating is a bad person, or nor is it the situation that you're a bad person. It's just that the consequences of our personalities affect the way we are about this. We have to assess, and I'm a big on assessing relationships, and that's because I'm a psychologist. But the fact that one thing that I always say, and I tell people, is you have what I consider what I have. For instance, is I have an inner circle of friends, and then I have an outer circle of friends. And the inner circle of friends are friends that I feel close with and confined with. And that typically is only about 2 to 3 people that I feel that I can pretty well tell anything, but feel that I can move things forward in life, and etc. And then you have that outer friends. And there again, folks, this is the influences of your personality. So if our personality attracts needy people, the fact of the matter is we're going to attract needy people. If we want to attract quality, wholesome relationships, we ourselves have to be whole in itself. So I've heard, like 4 weeks ago, I was talking to somebody. I told them, if you're really having some issues about your self-esteem or motivation or about where you are in your life, you need to get out of the dating pool, or out of the pool, as I like to say, and assess where you are in your own life. Because what you really do is, once you're in that pool, it is like you're going to attract, because there again, it's this laws of attraction. You're going to attract what you feel is important in your life. In other words, those people that are attracted. So, for instance, myself, though I may have a friend that I feel is a friend, maybe that person is not going to be that close friend, but they can be a friend, because the fact of the matter is they are not going to be attracted to what goes on in life. So, and as this is where we are with life in itself. And finally, when I talk about relationships themselves, what I talk about here is we have to attract what matters to us in our own life. And when I talk about what we talk about that matters most in our life, we have to attract what values are values in what we find personable in our own life. Now, as a psychologist, a few weeks back, I had an individual that came into my office, and they were saying to themselves, "How can I change this pattern of being? I feel like I'm dating the wrong people." And there again, the first thing I said, and like I said a few minutes ago in my video, is the fact that we tracked the people that matter, that matter the most or whatever, and not necessarily our best for our relationship. So the goal here is to always feel that. So what I wanted to talk about was, the goal was to talk about toxic relationships this first half hour. And then I will end up with some closing here because it's just, I got some things I need to do work-wise because I work in a center as well, but I do this on side coaching and relationship building as well. But the goal here is when we talk about this, what we're talking about is building relationships. And when we're talking about that, is when we're talking about a relationship's toxic, then what we need to do is, like I said, first thing is we step aside, step back and figure that out. And then what we have to do is figure, and I always like, and I'm not a big person on to-do list, but we have to figure out, and I have to always tell people, and I've told this people, can you see this person being in your life 6 months from now? And it's this very simple question. And it can't, if it's a relationship that's very sound and blessed, and you feel like there should be no, it should be an affirmation or a positive yes right off the bat. If you answer this honestly with yourself, then that is where you need to be. And then, okay, say you say to yourself, when I ask that question, do you see yourself being in this relationship 6 months from now? And that answer is no. Then what you have to do is honestly say what needs to change. You need to come up with 2 to 3 things that I feel this relationship needs to be. I would write those down. And then what I would do is honestly look at the person. And like I said, this goes back to the ABCs. You say, if we have some time, can we sit down and talk? I've got some things I'd like to talk about. Then you sit down and you talk to the person and say, listen, I feel that this relationship is stagnant. And really, for me to move forward in our relationships, I really like to sit down and talk about that. Now, when we talk about that, the issue is you can have TVs on, you can have any distractions. You need to have that one-on-one. So in other words, no radio's on, no computers on, no TV's on, no whether that is somewhere, like the weather is starting to warm up here in the Midwest. You can maybe go on for a walk or a hike. You may go to a small restaurant, somewhere where it's quiet, not real noisy, but where you can talk quantity, and then what you do with that. Now, if the person is saying, oh, I think everything's fine, we don't need to do this and all that, then you need to really assess honestly and say, we need to talk about this. And then you may bring in a coach, what I call a relationship coach. You don't necessarily need a psychologist, though a psychologist would help, but somebody that will be a moderator in this so you can move the relationship forward. So, with that said, these are some things that I think would help if you're in an abusive relationship. As I talked about above, the issue becomes where we see things going. So with that, folks, I want to end this little stream of mine. I'm planning to probably do another live stream, and probably next weekend is Easter, but probably the weekend after that. But I will be out of town at a conference. Maybe I will do one during the week. We'll see how the schedule goes. But the goal here is to always look at this and assess where you are in your life concerning your values and where that person values in your life. So, in other words, when we're in a relationship, we have to assess, is this relationship healthy for me? Anyway, folks, if you have any questions, folks, I appreciate the time that you spent with me today. And anyway, hope to talk to you soon. Bye.